Good afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So I had a few emails and a couple of people asked me of what I thought about Steve Meter and his idea of the quantitative easing actually being a deflationary scenario coming from the Federal Reserve. And there was a great interview that they did on Real Vision with Brent Johnston. Really good interview, and I'll leave a link down in the description for it. Uh, to explain it simply, at least from the way that I kind of understood it, um, this quantitative easing was actually a deflationary scenario coming from the Fed, quite opposite of what everybody kind of anticipated the quantitative easing doing. Because when quantitative easing was first introduced, everybody was convinced that this was going to be the hyperinflation scenario, that, this was going to weaken the dollar, it was going to crash, and that, the entire system was going to collapse. But the quantitative easing actually had a deflationary scenario. See, over the last 10 years, basically since they had instituted that quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve has had a hell of a time trying to achieve that 2% inflation target that they are shooting for. And the reason is that this quantitative easing, this money printing that went into the system to buy these bonds, never really made it out of the banking system. So when the Federal Reserve bought these bonds from the primary dealers, these big banks, they raised the reserve requirements on these banks. So when they purchased these bonds, it basically kept that money at the Federal Reserve with these accounts for the big banks. And although these banks could lend money against that using as collateral, that money itself, that printed money, never made it into the hands of the commerce or of the people. It never made it into commerce. It just stayed there in the banking system. And so at the same time that this stuff was sitting in the banking system, it dropped interest rates down, which is what the Federal Reserve was intending on doing anyway. That's what the whole point was, is to try and get interest rates down so people would feel more comfortable about going out there buying houses, cars, and going on vacation and whatnot. Although it dropped those interest rates, it actually did more damage to the inflation expectations than good. And the reason is that when those interest rates dropped down, all of a sudden return on investment for people dropped as well. So kind of think about it like this. If you had $1 million, say 20, 30 years ago, okay, you could get a fairly decent return on your investment. Like you had $1 million and getting a 10% return, you'd get $100,000 a year. You could live off of $1 million. Once you achieved $1 million, you could live off of the interest that $1 million would pay. But now we're in this ultra low interest rate world where $1 million really doesn't give you that much money to live off of. Okay, now if you had $1 million, you'd getting 2% or 3% get you $20,000, $30,000. Now you could take on some serious risk and try and get up to that 10%. But really, if you're going for the safer return, like saying getting into government bonds or something like that, you're not going to achieve a level that you can live off of if you had that $1 million. Okay, so what you have to have is $4 or $5 or $6 million. And so it caused people to have a higher savings account in order to achieve that interest rate level that they could live off of. Not so much the interest rate level, but the return on the investment because the interest rate level. Does that make sense? So instead of people being able to spend this money into the economy, they have to hold on to this money. They have to save it, which is keeping that money out of the economy, which is slowing the money velocity. All right, this is a lot of what Dr. Lacey Hunt was talking about. So there's that. There's the holding on to it. But then there's also the Federal Reserve speak right now, because they know that this quantitative easing doesn't stimulate the economy like everybody anticipated it would with all the money printing, right? They know that it doesn't, because they have to lend that money into the system. They can't just fire it up and just give it away. But that's what they want to do. Okay, and just recently, Loretta Mester, she's a Federal Reserve president. I forget what bank, but she just recently did a speech where she really talks about all the central bank digital currency and the aspects of it and why they would need to introduce this thing. And it really comes down to injecting money into the system. It has to do with negative interest rates, and it has to do with injecting money into the system. Okay, that's the main goal of the central bank digital currency. They want to come up with a lot of other excuses, like bringing, banking to the unbanked, streamlining, like, transactions so that you don't have to wait 2 or 3 days for things to clear. They would clear almost instantaneous. They have all these really like great promotive like ideas to promote, the goodness of central bank digital currencies. But ultimately, the whole idea of central bank digital currency is to inject money directly into the system, into your pockets, right? So they don't have to go through Congress. You don't have to go through, these channels of like these two sides competing against one another, trying to gain leverage over the other so that the stimulus package, they don't want to deal with that. Like the Federal Reserve would rather have a trigger mechanism where, like, say GDP goes to a certain level or unemployment hits a certain level. They'll have like these crisis bonds or these stimulus bonds that will kick in, that the Federal Reserve will essentially buy from the government if these levels are achieved, and then they'll take that money and inject it right into the system through the digital wallets that everybody will have with the Federal Reserve. They'll have like these digital wallets with Fed accounts attached to them, and the Federal Reserve will just fill those wallets up with digital currency, and you can go out there and spend that into the economy. This is the ultimate vision of the Federal Reserve when it comes to this digital currency. And the whole point of it is to get cash out of the system. See, once you get cash out of the system, then you can take interest rates into negative territory. You can take savings, you can take everything. See, like right now, negative interest rates is more about being in the banking system itself, up at the central banking level, okay? But if interest rates go negative enough, it'll eventually find its way into the depositors' accounts. And that's like you and me out there. And if we have negative interest rates attached to our accounts, we're going to pull all the cash out. We won't even second guess it. We'll be like, I'd rather have cash in my hand than to collect a negative interest rate attached to it. But what these central bankers are going to do is they're going to devalue cash to the central bank digital currency, forcing you to put your money back into the bank so that you do not lose it to that central bank digital currency. And then once it's in the bank, they'll attach a negative interest rate to it. You will be forced to spend your money or lose it, or invest it, or do something with it, right? But you won't be able to keep it. You won't be able to retain your wealth with the money. You'll have to do it with gold and silver or stocks or real estate or something, anything. But that's the ultimate plan. That's what I envision the Federal Reserve doing. And, the speeches that are coming out right now are really, are describing it. Like I said, Loretta Mesters it's a very long speech that really nails it in detail. My friend Tim, who I haven't heard from him in a while. I was a little worried about him. I thought something might have happened to him, but he popped up in the emails again. And he sent me a link to an IMF working paper from 2015 talking about central bank digital currencies and how to get cash out of the system. See, I thought this was more recent. I found one from 2019, I think it was, or 2018. I can't remember when I found that one. But these guys, this IMF, they've been working on the central bank digital currencies for a long time, and they're coming into play. They're gonna come into use anytime now. I can see it. I really want to talk about something that happened to a buddy of mine with cryptocurrencies, and it was quite by accident. He wasn't even trying to be part of cryptocurrencies, but he bought into a particular service, and it turned out that he ended up acquiring a bunch of cryptocurrency, one called Uniswap. And it was so much of it that he actually cashed out like $1,100 of this stuff. So I'm going to get a little bit more information about what happened there in his story and see if I can't come up with a good video for you guys. Because blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, this digital ledger system, this stuff is happening. This is definitely going to be part of the environment out there, the economy. And I would say in 10 years, people are going to look back and just be amazed that they didn't even realize it was taking place. See, that was the thing. That's the thing about this blockchain technology. A lot of people are using it and don't even realize it. See, he didn't even quite understand what he was getting into at the time when he bought into this service. All right? And and it was like his friend was showing him how to do it. And he was like just going along with it. He was like, yeah, okay, whatever. But he ended up with all this cryptocurrency quite by accident. And I told him, I said, this is happening in everything, every service, every distribution network. Everything is going to end up on a blockchain technology. It's going to get tokenized. Anyway, I'll find out a little bit more information about that stuff, and I'll talk to you guys about, what's going on there. But definitely look at the links down in the description. I'm going to leave one to the Zero Hedge article. I'll leave one to the Steve Meter interview, and I will leave one to the Loretta Mester speech. And I would love to get you guys' thoughts on some of the stuff that's taken place here, especially that Steve Meter one. That was really interesting. It kind of really opened my eyes to what quantitative easing is, because when that quantitative easing was first introduced and I learned about it, I thought for sure this is going to destroy the dollar. In fact, had you asked me like in 2012 how much longer the dollar has, I would have said it would have been over by now. So yeah, there's a lot to know. There's a lot to learn. And the cause and effects from a lot of this stuff, it's really up to people's imagination on a lot of that stuff, on what can end up being from it. Anyway, I'm going to stop babbling on. All right, Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.